Is it China's triumph in optics only, or a real picture of shifting global power? Leaders of the Global South have gathered in Tianjin, China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, now labeled the axis of upheaval. Does it show U.S. policies are pushing the Global South into a formidable union? Or is Western hegemony just too big to be challenged? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the SCO Summit. Iran, Russia, Myanmar, and even North Korea. All countries alienated under Western policy, but welcome this week in China. Beijing is leveraging its non-interference policy to rally not just what some call rogue nations, but also the most powerful economies in the Global South. At the SCO Summit in Tianjin, India and Russia especially will be seeking strength against U.S. financial dominance. In the case of India, that's meant 50% tariffs as punishment for importing Russian oil. Even a few months ago, few, if no one, would have predicted the leaders of China and India talking face-to-face about uniting the elephant and the dragon. But under the second Trump administration, conditions have changed rapidly, and the SCO is hoping to capitalize on just that. Here's a look.
In uncertain times, China is trying to position itself as the reliable global power. President Xi Jinping hosted more than 24 leaders in Tianjin for this year's Shanghai Cooperation Organisation Summit. Founded 24 years ago by 6 Asian countries, the SCO has grown in number over the years, but its impact has always been questionable. Deep-rooted divisions among member states have made it difficult for the group to deliver on its core goals of regional security, stability, and cooperation. Today, amid US President Donald Trump's tariffs and his America First foreign policy, it is gaining a new purpose. And China is seizing the opportunity, hoping to rally the Global South.
We should leverage the strengths of our mega-sized markets and economic complementarity between member states and improve trade and investment facilitation. We should enhance cooperation. We should advocate an equal and orderly multipolar world and a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, and make the global governance system more just and equitable.
One of the summit's most notable attendees is the Indian Prime Minister. Xi rolled out the red carpet for Narendra Modi's first visit to China in 7 years. Deadly clashes at the disputed Himalayan border in 2020 soured relations between the two countries to historic lows. Since then, the sides have sought to ease the tensions, but only recently have efforts seemed to gain a new momentum. Trump has doubled tariffs on Indian goods to 50% as punishment for buying Russian oil. The move could cost India hundreds of thousands of jobs and stall its economic growth. The changing realities have led a new milestone in China-India rapprochement.
It is the right choice for both sides to be friends, who have good neighborly and amicable ties, partners who enable each other's success, and to have the dragon and the elephant dance together.
The interests of 2.8 billion people of both countries are linked to our cooperation. This will also pave the way for the welfare of the entire humanity.
Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is under US pressure to settle the war in Ukraine, used the opportunity at the SCO to defend his military campaign, blaming the West and NATO provocations for the conflict. And he praised the SCO, comparing it favourably in contrast to Western systems and organisations.
A system that could replace the outdated Eurocentral and Euro-Atlantic models and would take into account the interests of a maximum number of countries and would be truly balanced. Meaning a system in which one group of countries would not ensure its security at the expense of the others.
Meanwhile, a US federal court ruled that most of Trump's tariffs are illegal. They will, though, remain in place until October. The administration is likely to carry the case all the way to the Supreme Court. Trump wrote on Truth Social that removing tariffs would be a total disaster for the US and make it financially weak. Yet many also argue the unpredictable tariff policy is pushing away nations from the US, a pending global trade order, and above all, hurting Washington's world power status. Could the handshakes, the laughs, and praise at the SCO summit be an illustration of this new dynamic, a symbol of the Global South's newfound geopolitical power? Or is the Global South's grasp not as strong as it believes?
So is China winning a temporary PR battle, or are we witnessing a profound shift in the global balance of power? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Washington, Republican strategist and former Republican candidate for Congress, Amanda Makki, and from London, senior research fellow in the Asia-Pacific program at Chatham House, Chietigj Bajpaee. Now, hopefully we'll have a Beijing voice joining us later in the program, but for now, I'll start with Chietigj and ask if we're asking what we're asking on this program because it makes a good headline, or is what's happening in China right now a genuine display of how power dynamics are changing globally?
Well, I think focusing specifically on the China-India relationship, I would say what we're seeing right now is more of a tactical rather than a strategic reset of the China-India relationship. And what I mean by this is, while the optics are definitely positive, none of the fundamental grievances in the bilateral relationship have really been resolved. Modi's visit is undoubtedly positive. It's an important milestone for the bilateral relationship. It's his first visit since 2018, and notably his first visit since the border clashes between both countries in 2020, which marked the worst period of hostility between both countries. But none of the fundamental grievances have really been resolved. I'm referring here to the border issue, but there are also several other fault lines in the relationship which have emerged or potentially re-emerged. So whether it be China's close relationship with Pakistan, which was a key point of contention during recent hostilities between India and Pakistan, water disputes. China's constructing the world's largest hydroelectric power project across a river that traverses both countries, or even the Tibet question, given the questions about the succession of the Dalai Lama, who recently turned 90.
It's interesting because the overarching question here is, to what extent can you unite countries with such kind of unrelated, even competing interests? We know, as you said, Pakistan and India are both there, for example, and many argue there's just too much negative history between most of the players involved to move forward pragmatically and challenge actual Western dominance.
Yeah, I think we need to remember that this organization, the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, was established in the mid to late 1990s. It was then, at that point, focused on resolving border issues among its member states, notably those in Central Asia. Over time, it's evolved and expanded its mandate to address what's referred to as the three evils of terrorism, separatism, and extremism. And more recently, it's increasingly focused on this effort to project an alternative worldview to that of the United States. So I think that is probably the one issue that perhaps binds all these member states together, this effort to present an alternative worldview to that being put forward by the United States and the broader West.
So let me put that to Amanda and ask, how is President Trump actually watching this? Does he see a message in it? Or does he not take the SCO or any of these so-called Global South organizations very seriously?
Maybe it's a combination of both. I would say that President Trump, in his recent Truth Social post on July 31st, basically said, these two economies can fail together, kind of like putting them not in any category close to the United States. And that's because if you look at the GDP of the United States, it is well north of the RIC countries combined. So the U.S. GDP around 28 trillion, Russia, India, China, maybe around 20 trillion. And so I think President Trump believes we're in a category of our own. As Peter Navarro has said, one of his chief economists has said, India, you're the largest democracy in the world. Why are you meddling with these other countries? So I think they're kind of thumbing the eye of India a little bit. But then you have the State Department today that released, a very glowing reflection of the very positive relationship that India has enjoyed with the United States over time, and kind of just mulled over the negative and just straight to the positive, all the alliances that they've had, the educational, technological advances that both countries have enjoyed together, and really talking about the flourishing relationship. This is on the heels of the Vice President, J.D. Vance, visiting with his Indian American wife and their family to India, spending time with the Prime Minister, Modi, in February. And so all of these things kind of paint a picture in the background of India and America having a very good, strong relationship. But India has to do what is in the best interest of India. If they want to be the hub of manufacturing, they have to rely on other countries, not just the United States, especially at a time when they don't really know their fate with the United States. And I think that's really what the takeaway should be. Not that there is a shift in the American dynamic with India, but rather that they are expanding their reach to other countries.
But Amanda, aside from India, when you have the SCO members now officially stating their full opposition to unilateral coercive measures, that's obviously a jab at the U.S., does Trump also not care about that?
Again, as I said, I think that Trump views the United States in a category of its own. I think he knows that these countries are just going to take the lead of the leaders, which, as we've talked about, the BRIC nations, Russia, India, China. And then you have really where President Xi put Putin really on a pedestal during this summit. It was clear who the favorite nation was there, between Modi and Putin, but certainly Putin had a large, oversized role, I would say. And so the fact that there were 20 Eurasian countries there and what they bring to the table, I think is China's ability and Xi Jinping's ability to say, we can bring nations together too in opposition to the United States. But I don't think President Trump, Peter Navarro, and the people that are advising President Trump in any way believe this is a threat. Although diplomatically, I think they're trying to make sure that, again, the relations are strong. However, China is certainly putting forth their best effort to show that we are an alternative to the United States. You're worried about Trump. Look at what we bring to the table and look at what we were able to convene. So this may be them trying to put this in front of Trump. I don't think President Trump cares.
Okay. So let me come back to Chietigj then. How much do you think the U.S. can just afford to laugh at all this? And is there also an angle here that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is using all of this as leverage of his own against the United States to see if the U.S. would take, a realignment for India seriously?
So one point to keep in mind is Modi's visit to China to attend the SCO summit. It predates the recent downturn in Indo-US relations. We've seen a steady improvement in the China-India relationship over the last year, from October of last year when a border agreement was announced. And since then, we've seen a steady improvement, the resumption of what's something called a special representative framework, which works on the border issue. We saw Prime Minister Modi and President Xi meet on the sidelines of the BRIC summit in Kazan, Russia last October. We've seen the re-emergence of several people-centric initiatives, resumption of direct flights, relaxing visa restrictions, for instance. So Modi's visit to China really should be seen as the culmination of these efforts. That being said, I think tensions between New Delhi and Washington has, of course, renewed the significance of Modi's visit to China. It reaffirms India's long-standing commitment to what it calls strategic autonomy. It demonstrates that New Delhi maintains a diversified and an independent foreign policy, and that it's not going to be beholden to the whims of the Trump administration. It's essentially an effort by not only India, but the other SCO member states to demonstrate that they maintain a diversified trade policy, that they're going to diversify their export markets, essentially try to reduce their dependence on the U.S.
Right.
And I think it's also an effort to demonstrate that they're more responsible powers, or a source of potential global stability compared to the more unpredictable tariff policies and trade policies that we've seen by the Trump administration.
You know, as for that kind of strategic autonomy, though, and for the economic impact as well, you now have the U.S. courts trying to block the tariffs that India would suffer most for. Do you think if that goes through, and if India is protected by the U.S. courts, they could flip back just as quickly in favor of a relationship with the United States as they seem to have done with China in the case of this meeting happening now?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is the situation remains highly fluid. I mean, if we look back to the first Trump administration, we saw Trump referring to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as little rocket man, and then a few months later he sat down with him for a summit meeting. Similarly, we saw the friction between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office earlier this year, and then the relationship has improved. So I wouldn't discount the possibility of a reset in relations. But that being said, I think words do matter. I think the claims that India is quote unquote a dead economy, that plus the fact that the U.S. has hosted Pakistan's army chief, Asim Munir, not once but twice on U.S. soil so soon after hostilities between India and Pakistan. And then this sense that India is essentially being singled out for its purchase of Russian crude with these additional 25% tariffs that have been imposed on India, but not other countries which are heavily dependent on Russian oil imports, such as China or Turkey, for that matter.
Right. I'll tell you what, we can get a voice now out of Beijing, and let me welcome Einar Tangen. He's senior fellow at the Tahe Institute, and he joins us now. Einar, thanks so much for being able to jump on the panel. We appreciate it. I'd really just like to get your take on what's happening at the SCO as we speak, actually. I had introduced this panel as whether or not we're actually witnessing a profound shift in global power dynamics. We've talked about this, Einar, on a number of occasions, but in this case, there are many that are arguing that right now what we're seeing through the SCO is about optics. It's about China having this opportunity to say we can kind of be friends with everybody and we're the more trusted partner, so lean our way. What do you think?
I think it's the other way around, Andrew. I think Donald Trump has made it clear that the U.S. is not reliable and they're looking for any port in the storm. I mean, India is not naturally inclined towards China. They have been very, they've had their issues. They still have border issues. They have trade issues. And there's a deep distrust that stems out of the Galwan incident. So you have different narratives on both sides. The issue is it's going to take time. So we're going to have to see whether these early harvest, whether the seeds that were planted back last October actually yield anything. And that's going to depend on action, not words. But clearly, Washington is going to be worried about those pictures showing, Xi, Putin, and Modi very relaxed, laughing, being very familiar with each other. It implies that, Donald Trump, the picture of him sitting like a principal surrounded by the EU, looking like students who had just been sent to the woodshed. Not the same. And, if we're looking at a multipolar world, the ability to communicate, get along, especially at the top levels, extremely important. So watershed moment, no, let's give it some time. We'll see.
Okay. Amanda, having said what you said and thinking that the U.S. can, in a sense, laugh at a lot of this, I want to ask you about the other angle, and that Kim Jong-un will be arriving in China very, very soon, and what Trump might make of that, what the administration might make of that, because he's very eager to get a meeting with the North Korean leader at some point within the year. And what would he really have to offer now that we're seeing fully on display the fact that China and Russia are both giving North Korea exactly what they want without asking them at all to denuclearize? What would the U.S. be able to offer as any incentive to bring North Korea to the table?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say, and I think going back to what your previous guest said, I think that President Trump really has these relationships, and then they may fall apart, as he said, little rocket man, and then they were meeting. So it's hard to say what they can offer, but I think what's going to be interesting is to see what dynamic comes out as far as the relationships. Does President Trump go back to the drawing board with someone like Modi after seeing these pictures? I don't believe so. But I really wonder what it is that will ultimately happen when you have all these different players, like a game of chess, doing different things, and how President Trump will react to that. That's really my question, is how this all will play out, because I think this was a very interesting SCO summit, maybe the most interesting there's ever been since its inception in 1996. So really seeing what's come out on the world stage and how the U.S. reacts will be interesting to see how the United States treats these different world leaders, and seeing them not siloed, but rather together, as you just mentioned.
Okay. Chietigj, let me ask you this, because we know that this has now been labeled this axis of upheaval, a takeoff on the axis of evil that was declared by George W. Bush decades ago. Do you find it an accurate tagline, or is it a bit insulting, or is it actually, in a way, kind of complimentary, letting the U.S. know that the rest of the world can disrupt as much as Trump thinks he can?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I think the idea of an axis of upheaval is somewhat overly simplistic, and it depends what your vantage point is from New Delhi or Beijing or Moscow or other capitals. That they would see the U.S. as the source of any upheaval in the international system. So I think it's difficult to sort of clump these countries together and view them through a single lens. I mean, again, going back to sort of India's position, it's interesting to note that Modi is attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, but he's not attending the Victory Day parade, which Beijing is hosting right after this, and also that Modi's visit to China follows a visit to Japan. I think this shows that while India may be moving closer to China and Russia, it doesn't want to distance itself from the US and the broader West. It wants to project an image of itself as a non-Western, but not an anti-Western world power. So I think, and this is very much in its line or in its position, long-standing position of strategic autonomy in its foreign policy, which is essentially to engage all major poles of influence in the international system. So I don't think it's really a good way of potentially framing how these countries, putting them under a single umbrella as some sort of axis of upheaval, as you've described.
Okay. Einar, I'm wondering what your take is on that now kind of accepted name for the emergence of the Global South in this SCO context. And also the fact that, President Xi just came out with his proposal for a global governance initiative at the SCO Plus summit. I mean, that would be revolutionary as far as global politics are concerned. But you've said we're going to have to wait it out because all of this will take a long time to develop. So, I mean, what kind of timescale are we talking about if we are going to see major change coming from initiatives like the SCO and the Global South?
Well, it depends on the parties involved. I mean, I don't hold out that this idea of putting names on things. This is an old narrative trick. You label your enemies with some nice trite phrase, and then you say, "Oh, this is the way that they are," and you lump them all together. I would agree with my previous speakers saying that they all have different agendas, but I would disagree that they have any space when it comes to this issue of tariffs. Unilateral tariffs by the U.S., as we said, against 180 countries, including some confused penguins, it didn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to anybody right now. And it certainly doesn't make sense to India, because they don't understand why there's a 180-degree U-turn on them. They didn't do anything. If anything was being pushed, it's the fact that they felt that the U.S. got involved in the trying to influence the general election. They had their fingerprints all over Bangladesh. Trump is running around, much to the ire of Modi, claiming that he settled the conflict between Pakistan and India. And then the U.S. is signing a energy deal in Balochistan, which is one of the most volatile areas of Pakistan. So, there's a lot of things that are going on, and then you have Peter Navarro on a daily basis throwing out practically racist slurs, saying that Brahmins are getting rich off, the war in Ukraine, that it's Modi's war, that they're taking a free ride, and it's being echoed by Hegseth and some other people within the administration. So yeah, there is plenty of reason to believe that there is something motivating this in Washington, and I think it's very clear. Actually, India is the weak point for Washington. If India goes forward, because it is not, no one can say it was against the U.S. If it comes forward with the rest of BRICS, it's the bigger bully. You can go to Donald Trump and say, knock it off. You can do what you want in terms of putting tariffs, which are going to be paid for by your people. But you cannot engage in this cynical game where you try to get other nations to bid against themselves for your benefit. This kind of colonial era type of nonsense. No one is in favor of that. Okay. And I don't care if it's a neighbor or the EU or enemies.
Okay. Amanda, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get your response because we are completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. So I'd like to thank so much all three of my panelists for joining us and our viewers for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.